Welcome back, guys, to Wrong Turn Horror. In today's episode, I'm sharing 8 disturbing Appalachian mountain cabin horror stories. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new horror story. The Appalachian Mountains are home to more than just misty trails, endless forests, and forgotten ghost towns. These mountains hide secrets, whispers of cabins where people vanish, places where shadows linger longer than they should, and rooms where silence feels alive. Tonight, I'll guide you through 8 stories of horror, each tied to a lonely cabin tucked deep in Appalachia. So, sit back, but don't get too comfortable, because sometimes a cabin meant for shelter becomes a place of no return. There are places in this world where silence feels heavier than sound, where the woods themselves seem to breathe and watch, and where time curls inward like smoke from a dying fire. Dead Man's Hollow, tucked away in the shadows of Fayette County, Pennsylvania, is one such place. Locals avoid it, whispering of curses, outlaws, and restless spirits. They say it's where footsteps echo without bodies, where doors knock without hands, and where cabins long abandoned still keep watch over those foolish enough to enter. And though the stories have drifted for generations through bars, porches, and firelit gatherings, one tale stands apart. A story from the autumn of 1978, when 4 college friends stumbled into a nightmare that would change them forever. Karen, Michael, Todd, and Julie were young, restless, and searching for one last thrill before the grip of adulthood closed in. They had heard rumors about Dead Man's Hollow, a trail winding through the forest, ending in an old cabin from the 1800s. No one remembered who had built it, and those who claimed to know refused to speak about what had happened there. Some said it was once a hideout for outlaws who killed anyone who stumbled upon their stash. Others swore it was used as a dumping ground during Prohibition, the bodies of gangsters and bootleggers left to rot in shallow graves. Most people didn't bother arguing the details. They simply said the land was cursed, that the woods had swallowed more than a few travelers who thought they could walk in and walk out untouched. But to 4 college students armed with whiskey, cigarettes, and bravado, it sounded like the perfect Halloween weekend adventure. The day they arrived was sharp and golden, the kind of October afternoon that makes you forget how quickly the woods can turn against you. The hike began with laughter and crunching leaves, Todd cracking jokes, and Michael daring Karen to race him up the trail. Julie trailed behind, her camera clicking occasionally. Though she spoke little, her silence mistaken for shyness rather than the unease that had already begun to settle over her. The deeper they went, the quieter the forest became. Birds that had been chattering near the trailhead fell silent. No rustle of squirrels, no distant woodpecker's knock, just the sound of their own boots hitting dirt, echoing strangely, as though the trees themselves were throwing their footsteps back at them. By the time they reached the clearing, the sun was already dipping low, bleeding amber light across the sky. And there it was, the cabin. It hunched in the clearing like something long dead, but unwilling to fall. The wood was black with rot, windows coated in grime, the roof sagging like a weary spine. The air around it felt wrong, thicker somehow, colder than the forest they had just left. Todd tried to laugh it off, muttering, "Looks like it's breathing," but his voice cracked at the end. Karen hesitated at the threshold, her map trembling slightly in her hand. "Are we really staying here?" she asked, her voice more plea than question. Michael only grinned, throwing his arm around her shoulder with the recklessness of a boy who thought fear was weakness. "Come on, it's perfect. What's scarier than a haunted cabin in the middle of nowhere?" The door resisted them, swollen with years of rain and rot. When it finally gave way, the hinges groaned like something alive, screaming at being disturbed. Dust swirled in the stale air, catching in their throats. Inside, the cabin was a ruin. Broken furniture lay scattered like bones. A fireplace loomed cold and blackened, and near the hearth strange markings were carved into the wood, symbols faded but unmistakable. Circles within circles, jagged lines intersecting like scars. Julie lingered on them, her eyes wide, whispering, "It feels wrong in here." But the others were already claiming corners, unpacking, trying to turn the ruin into a weekend hideout. That first night, the forest outside dissolved into blackness, pressing against the grimy windows. The only light came from their lanterns and the small fire sputtering in the hearth. At first, the mood was almost festive. Todd told jokes. Michael passed around a flask. Karen teased him for burning the cards in the fire by accident. But then the noises began. At first, they were faint, snaps in the underbrush, too deliberate to be wind. Karen stilled, her face tightening. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Michael, tipsy and fearless, grabbed a lantern and peered through the grime of the nearest window. The glass smeared under his sleeve, but beyond it was only darkness. Yet the sounds didn't stop. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, pacing, circling the cabin. The four froze, breath caught in their throats. "It's like someone's walking around us," Julie whispered, her voice brittle as frost. Then silence. The rest of that night was restless. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind, felt like a whisper against the walls. They managed little sleep, clinging to each other's company until dawn finally broke. By the second day, nerves frayed. Michael insisted it was animals. Todd laughed it off as the ghost hiker. But Karen's eyes flicked constantly toward the tree line, and Julie grew quieter, her lips pressed thin, her camera untouched. That night, the footsteps returned. Louder, closer. The sound of boots dragging against the porch made Karen sit upright, shaking Michael awake. Then came a knock. 3 sharp raps on the door. Every muscle in the cabin went rigid. "Who's there?" Michael whispered into the dark. No answer. Another knock, louder this time, making the swollen door quiver in its frame. Julie's voice trembled. "Don't open it." The knocking ceased, replaced by scratching. Slow, deliberate, fingernails raking wood. Michael pressed his face to a crack near the door, lantern held high. Outside, the woods loomed, empty, just black trees swaying in silence. When morning came, exhaustion hung on them like chains. But outside, the truth awaited. Boot prints, dozens of them, heavy, sunken impressions circling the cabin again and again, leading up to the door, stopping there, but not leading away. Rain poured on the third day, flooding the trail, trapping them. Inside, the air felt heavier, pressing into their lungs like smoke. Karen swore she saw something move in the corners, flickers of shadow that dissolved when she turned her head. Julie stopped eating, her gaze fixed on the wall, as though something unseen had claimed her attention. That night, the sound returned, but this time not outside. Boots dragged across the floorboards above them. Only the cabin had no second floor. The sound moved slow, deliberate, pacing the ceiling. "It's above us," Julie whispered, her voice cracked with terror. Then came the voice. Low, guttural, a whisper that carried no words they could understand, vibrating through the wood like the cabin itself was speaking. The fire guttered and died, plunging them into suffocating dark. Karen screamed. Michael's shaking hands relit the lantern, its weak glow spilling across the walls, revealing the markings near the hearth glowing faintly, symbols alive with a sickly fire. And then they saw it. In the corner, just beyond the light, something shifted. A figure, tall, shadowed, with shoulders too broad, limbs too long, standing perfectly still, watching, waiting. They didn't speak. They didn't dare. They ran, bursting through the door into the storm, slipping through mud and rushing water, branches tearing at their faces as they fled blindly through the forest. Further, no one noticed what happened. It was late October when David and Claire, a couple in their mid-20s from Charlotte, decided to escape the noise of the city for a quiet weekend in the Blue Ridge, the kind of trip they thought might reset their nerves and give them the romantic autumn retreat they had talked about since summer. Claire had found the cabin in a newspaper listing, the kind of ad tucked between yard sales and classifieds, almost too easy to overlook. Rustic cabin, it promised, cozy, private, perfect for couples. The price was suspiciously low, too low, but the photographs showed a picturesque little place. Dark log walls against a backdrop of fiery maples and hickories, a small loft above the main room, and a stone fireplace yawning with promise. Claire clipped the ad, calling it fate, and after some playful grumbling, David agreed. The drive from Charlotte to Boone was long but scenic, the roads winding into mountains where fog rolled down the ridges like pale fingers, swallowing the valleys whole. By the time they turned off onto the dirt road that led to the cabin, the air had grown damp and sharp, smelling of pine needles and cold earth, and both of them fell quiet as the woods thickened around them. The trees leaned close, the silence pressing, and even before the cabin appeared, they felt something odd, an absence of sound. No bird song, no squirrel scattering, no cicadas buzzing their last tired notes. Just the crunch of tires over gravel and the steady thrum of the car engine. When the cabin finally came into view, it stood hunched at the end of the road, a squat shadow among the trees. Its porch sagged slightly, one railing missing a spindle, and the windows looked cloudy, as though smeared from the inside. Yet there was something welcoming about it, too. The way smoke stains above the stone chimney suggested past fires, past warmth. Claire pressed her face to the window and smiled despite herself. "It's perfect," she whispered, already imagining evenings curled by the fire, the glow reflecting on David's face. He chuckled, shouldering the bags as he climbed out. "Perfect for what?" "Murder," he teased, his grin crooked, his tone light. She swatted him, but her laugh faltered quickly. In the shared silence that followed, both noticed again how still the woods were. It wasn't the peaceful stillness of nature. It was emptier, like the forest itself had gone mute. Claire tried to shake the thought, clinging to her optimism, while David, though he'd never admit it, felt a cold ripple in his chest as they crossed the porch and unlocked the cabin door. Inside, the place smelled faintly of old wood and damp stone, but the interior was simple and clean enough. A rug sprawled before the fireplace. A small kitchen sat tucked in the corner, and the loft stairs rose steeply to the second level. Dust filmed the windows and cobwebs clung to the beams, but it wasn't unlivable. Claire lit candles while David got the fire going, and soon the room flickered with warm light, shadows playing across the walls until the place felt cozy, even inviting. For a time, the evening unfolded perfectly. Wine poured, pasta simmered on the stove, the two of them laughing about old memories and dreams of what lay ahead. Outside, the wind keened across the mountains, but inside, it only seemed to amplify the comfort, as though the storm was holding them in. But then, as the fire burned low and the wine dulled their edges, the first sound came. Claire froze, glass halfway to her lips, eyes wide. "David, do you hear that?" He tilted his head, frowning. At first, he thought it was the wind seeping through cracks in the loft, but no, beneath the moan of trees, another sound bled through. Soft, fragile, a woman's muffled sobbing. It drifted down from the loft above them, not loud but distinct. Claire's breath hitched. "That's not the wind," she whispered, her voice cracking. "That's someone crying." David set down his glass, grabbing the lantern with hands that trembled despite his attempt to act calm. "It's probably an animal," he said, though he didn't believe it. "Raccoon, maybe," but the look Claire gave him, white-faced, terrified, told him she wasn't convinced, and neither was he. Lantern raised, he climbed the wooden stairs, each step groaning beneath his weight. The crying grew clearer for an instant, then stopped the moment his head breached the loft. Silence swallowed the space. The loft was empty, save for an old bed frame leaning crookedly against the wall, dust lying thick as frost on the floorboards. He swept the lantern's glow across the corners, the rafters, the shadows, but found nothing. When he descended, Claire's face was pale, her lips pressed into a line. "Did you see her?" she asked. David forced a shrug, setting the lantern back down. "There's no one up there. It's an old cabin, Claire. The boards creak, the wind whistles, it plays tricks on you." But in his heart, he knew the sound he'd heard wasn't the wind, and Claire didn't sleep that night. The next day they tried to shake it off, filling the hours with breakfast in Boone, browsing craft shops, buying a carved wooden bear from a roadside stand. For a while, the world outside the cabin felt normal, grounding, and they almost convinced themselves they'd imagined the night before. But as dusk fell and they returned up the dirt road, dread seeped back in, heavy as the fog. They kept the fire blazing high, opened more wine, and streamed a movie on David's laptop, determined to outlast the unease. For a time, laughter broke the silence, but around midnight, the sound returned. At first, faint sobs from the loft, then louder, sharper, until suddenly it swelled into a scream. Raw, guttural, a sound of such grief and fury it seemed to rattle the cabin itself. The windows vibrated, the walls trembled, and Claire collapsed against David, clamping her hands over her ears as tears streaked her face. "Make it stop. David, make it stop," she sobbed. He shouted hoarsely up at the loft, his own voice shaking. "Who's there? What do you want?" Instantly, the screaming cut off. The silence that followed was worse. Heavy, suffocating, pressing into their skulls. And then came the knock. 3 deliberate raps, echoing from inside the loft above them. Boom, boom, boom. Neither moved. They sat locked together on the rug, staring at the ceiling as though their gaze alone could hold the thing at bay. Eventually, exhaustion claimed them, though Claire jolted awake at every groan of the cabin until dawn finally came. Desperate for answers, David returned to the loft the next morning, determined to find something, anything. Behind a loose board near the bed frame, he discovered a small leather-bound journal, brittle with age. He flipped through it, the handwriting jagged and frantic, pages scrawled with despair. "She won't stop screaming," one entry read. "Day and night, the walls echo with her cries. I try to seal her in, but the cabin breathes with her. It feeds her voice. I cannot take it any longer." The last entry was smeared, the words slipping into near-illegible scratches. "The cabin is her grave, and it will be mine too." David's skin crawled as he read. He didn't tell Claire the full truth, only enough to convince her they should leave. They packed hurriedly, but when they tried the car, the engine coughed, sputtered, and died. Again and again, David turned the key, but the car refused. The nearest town was miles away, unreachable before dark. They were trapped another night. It was November of 1987 when the first whisper of the story began, though Earl Jennings and Tommy Price never intended to write themselves into a legend. They were hunters, simple men who lived in the shadow of the Appalachian Mountains, their lives measured by seasons of deer and turkey, by weathered barns and creeks swollen with autumn rain. Logan County, West Virginia, stretched around them like a green and gray wilderness, thick with brush and heavy with the quiet weight of ridges that swallowed sound. It was deer season, the kind of cold where the breath came out in fog, where rifle barrels stung your bare skin if you touched them too long. That morning, the woods seemed ordinary, birds startled by gunfire, leaves slick from an earlier drizzle, the musk of damp soil clinging to their boots. But before nightfall, they would stumble upon something that could never be mistaken for ordinary. The 2 men had pushed through a valley where the trees grew thick and low, their branches woven overhead into a canopy that filtered daylight into dull, greenish shadows. They were chasing whitetail, tracking a buck that had bolted deeper into the brush. Tommy, younger and eager, led the way, his orange vest bright against the gloom. Earl followed, slower, older, more cautious. They expected another ridge, maybe a stream. What they found instead was a clearing that should not have existed. The trees bent strangely around it, their trunks twisted as though they had grown away from something at the center, leaning outward in arcs that reminded Tommy of ribs spreading from a chest. In the middle of this clearing, half hidden beneath vines and layers of overgrowth, stood a log cabin. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable. Appalachia is littered with cabins, old moonshiners' shacks, forgotten homesteads, remnants of families who had fled when the coal dried up. But as the hunters studied it, unease began to creep into their bones. This cabin was different. Its logs were dark, swollen with rot, but solid. Its roof sagged, but had not collapsed. Most strange of all, there were no windows. Not a single opening, no shuttered glass, no cracks cut into the walls. Just 4 solid faces of wood, and, at the front, a door bound in heavy rusted chains, and secured with a padlock gone orange with age. Tommy frowned, shifting his rifle across his shoulder. Who built a cabin with no windows? His voice carried thinly across the clearing, immediately swallowed by the silence of the place. Earl spat into the wet leaves. Some bootlegger, maybe, didn't want nobody snooping. His words were confident, but his eyes betrayed unease. Bootleggers built shacks, sure, but they built them with windows to keep watch for revenuers, not seal boxes like tombs. The men stood there longer than they meant to, the weight of silence pressing down. Not even a crow called. No rustle of deer in the brush. The clearing felt smothered, as if the air itself had thickened. Tommy rubbed the back of his neck and realized the hair there was standing stiff. Curiosity warred with instinct. Finally, Earl muttered, "Let's see what's inside." It took only a few strikes with the butt of Earl's rifle before the weakened chains clattered to the ground. The padlock snapped, and the door creaked open on rusted hinges, exhaling a breath of air so foul both men gagged. The stench was overwhelming, rot, damp wood, and underneath it something sour, metallic, almost like blood left too long in the heat. Inside, darkness swallowed everything except the thin slice of daylight that bled through the open door. They stepped cautiously across warped boards, boots echoing in the emptiness. There was only one room, bare of furniture, bare of life, except for the single object at its center. A chair. It was wooden, crude but sturdy, planted firmly in the middle of the room. What made the hunters freeze was not the sight of the chair itself, but how it had been secured. Its legs were bolted into the floor, held fast with 4 thick nails driven so deep they split the boards. Around it, scratched into the wood, circled gouges. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, each mark jagged, frantic, radiating outward like desperate suns around the nailed chair. Earl muttered, "Jesus." Tommy crouched low, his fingers trembling as he brushed one groove. They were not the scratches of rats or raccoons. They were longer, deeper, human nails dragged until they split, clawing furrows into the wood. He whispered, "Someone was chained here." Earl's voice was low, almost unwilling. Or something was. The men backed away, both suddenly aware of how wrong it felt to stand there. The smell thickened. The silence grew. They left the cabin as they had found it, letting the broken chains dangle loosely from the door, and swore unspoken oaths not to mention it again. But that night, the cabin refused to let them go. Tommy dreamed first. He saw himself in the chair, bound at wrists and ankles, unable to move. The cabin's walls loomed, but there was no door, no exit. Darkness filled every corner until it was impossible to see. Yet he felt something moving around him. He could hear it breathing, slow and wet, just behind his ear. He tried to scream, but his mouth was sealed. Then, from the shadows, a whisper hissed, "It's your turn now." He woke, gasping, sweat plastering his shirt, the echo of the voice still curling in his ears. The next day, he told Earl. Earl's face paled, and with a shudder he admitted that he had dreamed the same. The chair, the darkness, the whisper. Neither man laughed. Neither man pretended it was coincidence. Instead, they swore never to return. But swears mean little when the mountains themselves pull at you. A week later, Tommy found himself walking back toward the clearing. He could not explain why. He told his wife he was going to check deer sign, but deep in his chest, he knew the cabin was calling. The forest seemed to part for him, as though the trail had grown clearer since their first visit. When he reached the clearing, his breath caught. The cabin stood exactly as before, windowless, silent. But the chains had returned. A new padlock gleamed in the dim light, untouched and unbroken. Tommy's heart pounded. He had not replaced it. Neither had Earl. Yet still he broke it. He forced his way inside, driven by an urge he did not understand. The chair sat waiting in the center, unchanged. But this time, the walls bore new scars. Opposite the chair, fresh scratches cut into the wood. Not wild arcs, but letters deliberate and crude. He squinted through the gloom until the words formed clear. "Let me out." Tommy stumbled backward, fleeing into the woods, refusing to look behind him. From that day forward, his life unraveled. The dreams returned nightly, each one worse than the last. Now in them, he was not alone with a whisper. Something loomed close, pressing cold breath against his skin, clawing invisible fingers down his arms. He woke screaming, tearing at his flesh until blood slicked his nails. His wife begged him to see a doctor. He refused. Instead, his eyes grew hollow, his voice thin. He muttered about the chair, about the voice waiting for him, about how he could not escape. Earl fared little better. He had not returned, but he swore he saw figures on the edges of his property. Tall, thin, faceless, watching from the tree line. When he shouted at them, they did not move. When he fired warning shots, they did not flee. Each time he blinked, they were gone, but the unease lingered like a shadow that never left. It was the summer of 1998 when Daniel Hartley, a 32-year-old schoolteacher from Richmond, decided he needed to escape the noise of his life. Freshly divorced and exhausted from months of bitterness, he longed for silence and air that didn't carry the weight of traffic or voices he didn't want to hear. The Virginia Appalachians seemed like the perfect place to heal, so he rented a cabin perched precariously close to the edge of a rocky cliff. From its porch, he could see miles of ridges blanketed in pine and oak, the morning mist rising like smoke through the valleys. The realtor had warned him the place was isolated, but that was exactly what he wanted. He thought he'd find peace there. What he found was something else entirely. On his first night, Daniel cooked a simple meal, opened a beer, and sat on the porch as the sun bled away behind the mountains. Twilight deepened and a storm rolled in, thunder grumbling low while rain drummed steadily against the cabin roof. Inside, the place was small but comfortable, wooden beams, a tidy kitchen, a single bedroom. The steady rhythm of rain seemed ready to lull him into sleep. That was when he heard it. At first he thought it was only the storm, but the sound didn't match the rain. It was deliberate, slow, the faint scrape of fingernails dragging across glass. Tap, tap, scrape. He froze, staring at the window across the room. That window faced the cliffside. No porch, no ledge, nothing but a sheer drop into empty air. Summoning courage, he forced himself to look, but lightning struck at that exact moment, flooding the glass with white light, and by the time his eyes adjusted, the window showed nothing. Still, sleep did not come easy. The next morning, he laughed it off. His imagination, he told himself. He went hiking, admired the wildflowers, even took pictures of deer grazing at the tree line. Yet when night returned and the storm gathered again, so did the sound. Tap, tap, scrape. Determined not to frighten himself, Daniel grabbed a flashlight and shined it toward the window. Nothing but his reflection stared back at him. But when lightning split the sky again, he saw it for just a second, a tall, pale figure standing on the cliffside. That was impossible. No one could stand there. The drop was sheer, yet the figure didn't move, didn't sway in the wind. It only watched. Daniel slammed the curtains shut and did not sleep at all. By the third day, he considered leaving, but pride and stubbornness held him there. He told himself the mountains were playing tricks on him, that isolation could make the mind see ghosts and shadows. That night, he poured himself a drink, sat in the living room, and braced himself for the storm. Lightning cracked, and, once again, the figure appeared on the cliff. Always in the same place, always staring. By midnight, the tapping returned, louder now, insistent. Daniel pressed his back against the wall, heart hammering, when he heard something far worse than the scrape of nails. A whisper, low, faint, right against his ear. Don't look outside. He froze. His skin prickled as if icy breath had brushed his neck. The whisper had come from inside the cabin. He spun around, searching, but found only empty shadows. Panic overtook him. He bolted into the bedroom, locked the door, and waited until dawn. The next morning, Daniel's unease drove him to search the cabin. He rifled through shelves and cupboards, hoping for some explanation. Behind a loose board near the fireplace, he found an old notebook, its pages yellowed with age. The entries were dated from the 1960s, written in a shaky hand. It watches me, one page read, always on the cliff. It never moves, but it never leaves. Another line chilled him further. Last night it tapped again. I thought I saw its hand, long fingers too long. The final entry was smeared, the ink blurred as though mixed with tears. If anyone finds this, don't stay here. Don't look at it. Don't look outside. That night, the storm came harder than before. Rain battered the cabin, and wind screamed through the cracks. Lightning burst across the cliffside, and Daniel swore the figure was closer. No longer at the edge, but near the glass itself. Its face was pale, its eyes black hollows. The tapping grew frantic, scratching, clawing, desperate. Again the whisper rose, louder, insistent, filling every corner of the cabin. Don't look outside. Daniel shut his eyes, clamped his hands over his ears, but the voice only grew stronger until it seemed to crawl inside his skull. Then, suddenly all was silent. When he opened his eyes, the curtains moved though the windows were closed. His reflection in the glass was wrong, its mouth still moving, whispering words he could not hear. By dawn, Daniel had had enough. Shaking, sleepless, he stuffed his bag, threw it into his car, and tore down the mountain road without looking back. He did not stop until he reached a diner miles away. Pale and trembling, he told the waitress what he'd seen. She only gave him a pitying look. "You're not the first," she said. "That cabin's been empty near 30 years. Folks go there, they don't last long. Always leave saying the same thing." Daniel leaned forward and asked her what thing. She lowered her voice. "That something's watching from a cliff. And once you've seen it, it don't stop following you." Daniel never returned to the cabin. He told himself he'd escaped, that whatever haunted that cliff was bound to the mountain. But weeks later, back in Richmond, he woke one night to a sound at his apartment window. Tap, tap, scrape. His blood ran cold. He lived on the 6th floor. No balcony, no ledge, nothing outside but open air. A storm swept through the city, and when lightning lit the sky, Daniel saw it, standing in the air, staring in at him through the glass. The whisper came again, soft and familiar, curling into his ear. "Don't look outside." That was the story of the cabin on the cliffside. A place where the view isn't just breathtaking, it's deadly. A place where something waits on the edge, patient and silent, until the storm calls it closer. Would you dare spend a night in a cabin perched on a cliff, knowing something might be standing in the rain, staring through the window at you? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, in Appalachia, some cabins don't just face the wilderness. They face something else entirely. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, subscribe to Wrong Turn Horror, hit the bell icon, and join me again for more true Appalachian horror. Good night, and whatever you do, don't look outside. In the fall of 1984, 3 college friends, Ethan, Mark, and Sarah, decided to take a weekend trip to explore old mining towns in West Virginia. All 3 were history majors, fascinated by ghost towns and abandoned buildings, eager to uncover the past where time itself had stopped. Their road took them deep into McDowell County, a place once alive with coal and promise, now hollowed out by the collapse of the industry. Rusted machinery lay half-buried in weeds, skeletal remains of houses lined the empty streets, and silence reigned where the shouts of miners once echoed. But it wasn't the hollowed-out town that stayed with them. It was the cabin they found in the valley below. It sat at the base of a narrow gorge, near the collapsed mouth of a long-dead mine. The windows were broken, the porch sagged, and the door hung crooked on rusted hinges. But it wasn't the ruin itself that made Sarah shiver. It was the message scrawled across the wood in faded black paint. The words, jagged and uneven, read, "Don't stay after dark." Ethan laughed, brushing it off as a prank meant to scare off trespassers. Mark pulled out his camera, eager to capture it for their project. Sarah, though, felt a weight pressing into her chest. The words didn't feel like a warning from the living. They felt like the last breath of the dead. Still, against her protests, they went inside. The cabin smelled of rot and coal dust, damp and suffocating. A single table sat in the center of the room, its surface etched with deep scratches, while a rusted bed frame leaned in one corner. The walls were scarred with strange symbols, circles, lines, marks that none of them recognized. In another corner, they found an old miner's helmet with its lamp still attached. Mark lifted it, marveling. The leather strap was cracked with age, but the light still worked. He switched it on, and after a weak flicker, the beam held steady. That was when they noticed the carvings on the table. Not symbols this time, but numbers. Dozens of dates gouged into the wood. The most recent one read, October 12, 1962. The same day the nearby mine collapsed, burying 17 men alive. Despite Sarah's unease, the three friends decided to stay the night. They unrolled sleeping bags, lit a lantern, and tried to shake off the chill in their bones with laughter. But as darkness deepened, the laughter faded. At first, the sound came faintly, like rocks shifting deep underground. Then came the heavy crunch of footsteps on gravel, slow and deliberate. Ethan grabbed the lantern and peered outside. Nothing but the restless sway of trees. Sarah whispered for them to be quiet. They listened. That was when they all heard it. The sharp metallic ring of picks striking stone. Clang, clang, clang. Slow, steady, relentless. Mar tried to laugh again, saying it was echoes, maybe rocks falling. But Sarah shook her head. Her voice trembled when she said, "No, that's digging." Around midnight, the whispers began. Faint at first, like wind sighing through cracks. Then stronger, dozens of voices murmuring just outside the cabin walls. Ethan pressed his ear to the door, heart pounding. Through the muffled chorus, he swore he heard words. Trapped, can't breathe, let us out. The air thickened, heavy with the taste of coal dust, until Sarah coughed and wheezed, her lungs burning. Mark, desperate, swung the miner's helmet light toward the window. That was when they saw the handprints. Dozens of them, smeared black against the glass, fingers too long, dragging, pressing, leaving soot-stained trails. The voices rose, urgent, frantic. "Help us, let us out." The three huddled together, frozen until the first light of dawn finally dissolved the voices into silence. Shaken but unable to resist their curiosity, they searched the cabin again the next morning. Beneath the rusted bed frame, Sarah found a small leather-bound journal. Its pages were brittle, but the handwriting remained sharp. It belonged to a miner named Thomas Avery. The first entries were simple, shifts worked, weather noted. But as they turned the pages, the words darkened. "Men say the mine's not right," one entry read. "Hear voices when the lamps go out. See lights where no one works." A later page warned, "Collapse fears grow. I pray they shore the beams, but the company won't spend the money." Then came the words that made Sarah's blood run cold. "I hear them at night, even here in my cabin, tapping at the walls, begging to be let in." The final entry, written days before the disaster, was little more than a scrawl. "They won't stay buried. The mountain won't keep them down. When a mine seals, their souls will come scratching at my door." Sarah begged to leave then and there, but Ethan's hunger for proof outweighed fear. He wanted photos, recordings, evidence. "If this is real," he said, eyes wide, "we could make history." Sarah whispered back, "Or become history." That evening, as a storm rolled over the valley, thunder shook the mountains and rain lashed the cabin's roof. Then, beneath the roar of the storm, came the sound again. Clang, clang, clang. But it wasn't coming from the mine this time. It came from beneath the cabin floor. The wood trembled under their feet, dust falling from the rafters. Ethan shouted, "They're under us." Mark swung the lantern toward the floorboards, and they all saw it, dark shapes writhing between the cracks. Hands, blackened, skeletal hands pushing upward, clawing for air. The whispers returned, louder now, desperate, pressing against their ears. "Air! Please! We're still here!" Sarah screamed as one hand splintered through the wood and seized her ankle, leaving a smear of black dust on her skin when she kicked free. Panic consumed them. They grabbed their bags and ran for the door, but it slammed shut with a force that rattled the cabin. The symbols etched on the walls pulsed faintly, glowing like veins under skin. The digging grew louder, deafening. And then, silence. For a heartbeat, they thought it had ended. Then came the ragged sound of breathing. From the shadows in the corner, a figure emerged. A man, or what remained of one. His skin was gray and torn, his eyes hollow sockets. A miner's helmet still clung to his skull, its lamp flickering weakly. His mouth opened, and cold dust poured out like ash. Another figure followed, then another, until 17 stood in the room, crawling through floor and wall alike. The dead miners come home. Ethan shoved Sarah and Mark toward the window. They smashed the glass and fled into the storm, scrambling down the valley slope, the rain washing soot from their hands and faces. The miners didn't follow, but their whispers chased them on the wind. "Stay with us forever." The three didn't stop running until they reached their car. Even then, when Ethan jammed the key into the ignition, he swore he heard it. Clang, clang, clang. Picks striking rock, not from a mine, but from the trunk of the car itself. Years later, Sarah would be the only one to tell the story. Ethan and Mark buried it, refusing to speak of it again. But Sarah swore the cabin was real, the miners were real, and sometimes when storms rolled across the mountains, she woke to the sound. Clang, 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 as though someone was still digging, still trying to claw their way free. That was the story of the abandoned miners' cabin, a place where tragedy struck, sealing 17 men in darkness, and where their spirits still claw at the earth, desperate for release. Would you dare spend a night there, listening to the whispers of the buried dead? In January of 2003, Claire Morrison, a 28-year-old nurse, set out on what was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway. Her cousin Jason had invited her to join him and two friends at a cabin near Spruce Knob, the highest point in West Virginia. Claire almost canceled when she heard the blizzard warning, but Jason reassured her that the cabin was stocked with food and firewood. "Worst case," he told her, "we ride it out together. It'll be cozy." The drive up the mountain was anything but cozy. Snow fell in blinding sheets, the narrow road twisting along cliffs hidden under ice. By the time Claire's SUV crawled into the clearing where the cabin stood, her knuckles ached from clenching the wheel. The cabin itself sat hunched beneath a heavy roof of snow, smoke curling weakly from the chimney. Inside, Jason greeted her warmly, and his friends, Megan and Eric, handed her a steaming cup of cocoa. The storm roared outside, but the fire glowed golden in the hearth. For a moment, Claire let herself believe Jason was right. For a moment, it did feel cozy. But then night fell. By midnight, the storm had buried the cabin up to its windows. Snow hammered the roof, wind screamed through the eaves. The four of them played cards by firelight, laughing to keep the unease away. When the fire dwindled, Claire offered to fetch more wood from the covered pile outside. She bundled up, pushed through snow that swallowed her knees, and reached for the logs. That was when she saw it. Across the clearing, at the edge of the trees, a figure stood. Tall, thin, perfectly still. At first, she thought it might be Jason, but she knew he was inside. Megan and Eric, too. The figure didn't move. It only watched. A blast of wind cut across the clearing, and when the snow settled, it was gone. Claire dropped the logs and ran back into the cabin, heart hammering. She said nothing. Not yet. By the second night, they were sealed in completely. Snowdrifts had risen higher than the porch roof. That was when the knocking began. Slow, heavy. 3 deliberate knocks against the back bedroom wall. Jason brushed it off as shifting beams in the storm, but an hour later, the sound came again, this time at the front door. Eric grabbed a flashlight, yanked it open, and was met with a wall of snow. No footprints, no sign of life. They closed the door quickly, shivering at the blast of cold air. But Claire knew what she had seen. That night, when she finally drifted asleep, she dreamed of the figure standing at the window, silent, watching. On the third day, while searching for candles, Claire stumbled across a drawer stuffed with old papers. Buried among them was a thin leather journal. Its pages dated back to the 1940s. It told the story of a family who had once lived in the cabin year-round. A trapper father, a mother keeping house, 2 children who played in the snow. At first the entries were ordinary, almost cheerful. But as the winter deepened, the words turned grim. Something out there in the trees. Too tall, too thin. Always watching. Another page read, "It knocks when the wind howls. The children hear it whisper their names. Then, snow too deep to leave. It waits for us to starve." The final entry was nearly illegible, letters carved in desperation. "It is at the door. God help us." Claire's hands shook as she closed the book. That evening, Jason found her sitting wide-eyed by the fire, the journal in her lap. She told him everything about the figure she'd seen, the dream, the words in the journal. Jason tried to calm her. Isolation does strange things to people. Maybe that family just lost their minds. But before he finished, the knocking returned. 3 deliberate strikes. This time from the window. They all froze. The snow had covered it completely. No one could possibly be outside. And yet, knock, knock, knock. Then came the whisper. Faint, muffled, but unmistakable. "Let me in." Megan screamed. Jason cursed. Eric clutched a knife from the kitchen. And Claire whispered back, "Go away." The whisper answered, "Can't hungry." By the 4th day, their supplies had dwindled and tempers frayed. Eric accused Claire of scaring everyone with stories. Megan begged to dig out, though the storm still raged. But what shattered their resolve was Jason's discovery at the back wall. While pulling wood from the inside stack, he noticed the boards were damp, snow seeping through cracks. When he pressed the wood, flakes spilled inside. Long, jagged gouges marked the exterior boards, claw marks. Something had been trying to get in. That night, the knocking didn't stop. It circled the cabin, moving from wall to wall, door to door, window to window. Patient, relentless. The whisper pressed into their ears, growing louder. "So cold, let me warm." Claire clamped her hands over her ears, tears running down her face, but the voice spoke from inside her own head. By the 5th night, the storm finally eased. But peace did not come. Just before dawn, a sharp crack split the silence. The back wall caved inward, snow pouring in as the board splintered. And then it entered. The figure was taller than the doorway, its body as thin as bone, skin pale as ice. Black voids gaped where eyes should have been, and its mouth stretched too wide, a jagged slit across its face. It crawled inside on limbs too long, joints bending backward as it moved. The lantern flickered, the fire roared, and the stench of rot and frozen earth filled the cabin. Jason swung an axe, but it passed through like smoke. Eric stabbed with the kitchen knife. Nothing. Megan collapsed, screaming. The creature leaned over her, whispering one word, "Hungry." Claire grabbed the journal and Jason's arm. "We have to run." They smashed a front window, snow tumbling inside, and scrambled into the drifts outside. Megan's screams cut off behind them as the thing claimed her. The 3 who remained staggered into the storm, blinded, lungs burning with cold, fighting through waist-deep snow. They didn't look back until they reached the tree line. When they finally turned, the cabin was silent. Still, but in the window, the figure stood, watching. Rescue crews found them 2 days later, frostbitten and delirious. Megan was never found. Officials claimed the cabin had been destroyed when part of the mountain slope collapsed under the storm. They called it an accident, but Claire knew the truth. She still keeps the journal hidden away. And even now, when snowstorms sweep across the city where she lives, she sometimes wakes to the sound of it again, the slow, heavy knocking. "Let me in." That was the story of the snowbound cabin. A place where the storm isn't the only thing that traps you, where hunger has a face and it waits outside the walls until you invite it in. Would you survive a winter storm in the Appalachians, cut off from the world, if something was whispering at your door? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, in Appalachia, some storms don't just bury cabins in snow. They bury secrets. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, subscribe to Wrong Turn Horror, hit the bell icon, and join me again for more Appalachian nightmares. Good night. And if you hear knocking during a snowstorm, don't open the door. Locals in Harlan County still whisper about the cabin on Crow Hollow Ridge. It was built in the late 1800s by a woman named Margaret Dillard, though most remembered her only as Maggie of the Hollow. She was a healer, a midwife, and some claimed a witch. Maggie knew herbs and roots, cured sickness when the town doctor failed, and delivered babies when mothers were at death's door. But she also cursed those who cross her. When crops withered or livestock died, Maggie was blamed. And one winter, when 3 children in town died mysteriously, the whispers turned to rage. The townsfolk dragged her from her cabin, accused her of witchcraft, and burned her alive just outside her own door. Her final words were a curse. "If you take from me, I'll take from you. If you seek me, you'll never return." Since then, her cabin has rotted where it stood, abandoned and shunned. Hunters avoided it. Hikers turned back when they saw the ridge. But in 1995, 4 teenagers dared to test the legend. Lacey, Brent, Tyler, and Amber, all seniors at Harlan High, hiked up Crow Hollow Ridge on Halloween night. Fueled by cheap beer and bravado, they laughed as their flashlights bobbed through the trees. Yet when the cabin came into view, their laughter faltered. It sagged under decades of decay, roof half collapsed, chimney crumbling. Strange symbols were carved into the doorframe. Circles, triangles, runes none of them recognized. Lacey hesitated, shivering. "Maybe we shouldn't," she whispered. But Brent, the ringleader, grinned. "What's the worst that could happen? Old Maggie's been dead 100 years. And with that, he shoved the door open. Inside, the air was heavy, choking with mold and old smoke. A broken rocking chair sat in the corner. Bundles of dried herbs dangled from the rafters, impossibly intact despite the years. On the table lay a cracked clay bowl filled with ashes, and beside it, a bundle of sticks tied with red thread. Amber's voice trembled as she said, "It looks like she just stepped out." Tyler snorted and kicked at the ashes. "Creepy junk." But when he did, the herbs began to sway, though no wind stirred. Lacey gasped, "Don't touch anything." Brent only laughed. He grabbed the bundle of sticks and waved it like a toy. "Oh, spooky. What is this, her magic wand?" That was when the door slammed shut. They screamed, but the handle wouldn't budge. The room grew icy, their breath misting in the air. Then came the whisper, a woman's voice, low and drawn out. "Who takes from me?" The herbs above swayed harder. The ashes in the bowl stirred as if breathing. Brent cursed and dropped the bundle, snapping the red thread. The cabin came alive. The rocking chair creaked forward and back, the clay bowl split down the middle, and in the corner a shadow gathered. Long hair, a crooked silhouette, eyes glowing faintly red. Amber shrieked, "It's her!" They bolted for the window, smashed the glass, and tumbled into the night. Though no snow had fallen, their clothes were dusted with ash. They ran until the ridge was far behind them, swearing never to speak of it again. But Maggie wasn't finished. That night, Brent woke to scratching at his bedroom window. He lived on the 2nd floor. When he pulled back the curtain, a pale face peered in at him, mouth stretched into a smile too wide for any human. By morning, Brent was dead. Doctors claimed his heart had failed, but his chest bore deep gouges, as if claws had reached inside. Tyler stopped showing up at school. His parents said he'd fallen ill, but when Lacey visited, she found him pale and hollow-eyed, muttering Maggie's name over and over. By winter, he vanished entirely. Amber tried to escape, moving in with relatives in Lexington. 2 weeks later, she was struck by a truck whose driver swore she had stepped right into the road, smiling. Only Lacey remained. She carried the memory of that night and the weight of the curse. In her dreams, she heard Maggie whisper, "Who takes from me?" In 2001, 6 years later, Lacey returned to Crow Hollow Ridge. She was 23, newly married, desperate to break what haunted her. She hiked back to the cabin with a journal in hand, determined to burn what remained and bury Maggie once and for all. But when she reached the place, the cabin was unchanged. The herbs still hung. The ashes still sat in the cracked bowl. And on the table, tied neatly with red thread, lay the bundle Brent had broken, restored, waiting. Lacey's hand shook. She dropped the matches. And then she heard footsteps. Soft. Behind her. She turned, and Maggie stood there. No longer a shadow or a whisper, but flesh, skin pale, hair wild, eyes burning red. She opened her mouth, and ash poured out as she hissed. "You came back." The door slammed shut. Lacey was never seen again. Her car was discovered at the trailhead, keys still in the ignition. Search parties combed the ridge, but no trace of her was found. Locals say the cabin still waits. That on nights when the moon is full, If you stand at the foot of Crow Hollow Ridge, you can hear her voice drifting down the mountain. Who takes from me? And if you're foolish enough to step inside, you'll see the herbs sway, the ashes breathe, and the bundle of sticks resting on the table, always tied with fresh red thread. That was the story of the witch's cabin, a place where curses don't fade with time, where the dead still claim what's theirs, and where some doors, once opened, should never be closed again. Would you dare step inside a cabin said to belong to a witch, knowing her curse still lingers? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, in Appalachia, the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes it waits for you in the hollow. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, subscribe to Wrong Turn Horror, hit the bell icon, and join me again for more Appalachian nightmares. Good night, and beware the whispers in the trees. There's an abandoned logging road deep in the Monongahela National Forest, straddling the Appalachian ridges of West Virginia. Locals call it Whisper Trail. At the end of that trail sits a cabin built by lumbermen in the 1920s. It should have rotted away decades ago, but strangely it still stands, its wood darkened but intact, as if preserved by something unseen. The cabin has one reputation: silence. Birds never land on its roof. No squirrels scamper across its porch. Even the wind dies when you step too close. Hunters avoid it because they say the silence isn't just around the cabin. It seeps into you. And once you hear it, you don't hear anything else again. In 2013, 3 hikers, Jordan, Emily, and Scott, set out on Whisper Trail. They weren't thrill seekers, just adventurers with cameras, chasing rustic scenery for their blogs. At first, the trail was beautiful. Autumn leaves glowing orange and red, a brook tumbling beside them, boots crunching on the dirt. But as they pressed deeper, the sounds faded. First the insects vanished, then the brook fell silent, though it still rushed at their side. Even their footsteps dulled, as if swallowed. By the time the cabin appeared in the clearing, the forest was utterly silent. Emily whispered that it felt wrong. Scott grinned nervously and said it was cool and perfect for photos. Jordan adjusted his camera and suggested they check it out for 10 minutes. The cabin stood perfectly centered in a clearing, as if the forest had peeled away for it. It was a one-room structure with a stone chimney and intact roof. What unsettled them most was how untouched it seemed. No graffiti, no weather damage, not even cobwebs. Emily asked why it looked alive. Jordan pushed open the door, and it swung wide without a sound. Inside, the silence pressed harder, almost physical. Their breathing was too loud, their heartbeats intrusive. The only furnishings were a single table and 3 chairs. On the table sat a small leather-bound book. Scott opened it and found not a diary, but a ledger. The first page, dated 1928, read, "We built this cabin to rest after work." But the woods grew quiet. The men grew uneasy. One by one, they stopped returning. The silence followed them home. The next entry, from 1951, said, "My father died in this place. I came seeking answers. I heard nothing for days. Nothing but the silence. Now I understand. It wants to be filled. By us." The final entry, dated 1987, warned, "If you're reading this, don't stay. Don't listen. Don't let it inside. Leave before it notices you." Emily slammed the book shut and insisted they leave. But when they turned, the door was gone. The wall where it had been was smooth wood. Jordan's flashlight flickered as Scott pounded at the logs, swearing the door had been there seconds ago. The silence grew denser, stuffing into their ears like cotton. Jordan clapped his hands, desperate for sound, but none came. Emily gasped and mouthed, "Where's my voice?" Her lips moved, but no sound escaped. Panic erupted. Jordan shouted. Scott screamed. Their throats strained, but silence consumed everything. The cabin wasn't just silent. It had silenced them. They pounded on the walls, tried the windows, but the glass wouldn't crack. Scott hurled the book, but when it hit the wall, it made no sound. Jordan checked his camera. It blinked red, recording, but the playback was nothing but silent footage of 3 people moving their mouths in terror. Time slipped. Minutes or hours passed. They couldn't tell. Scott scribbled into the ledger, "We can't leave. It won't let us." A new line appeared beneath his words. Good. You've joined us. Then the shadows in the corner deepened, not with shape, but with absence. A void stretched upward, faceless, shapeless. Scott clutched his head, his lips forming. It's in my head. Jordan dragged Emily against the wall, pressing desperately as the silence thickened. They realized it wasn't nothingness they heard. The silence was a presence, suffocating, invasive, filling every space sound should be, and it wanted to live inside them. Scott fell first. His eyes rolled back, his mouth opened in a silent scream, and his body convulsed before going limp. When Jordan shone his light on him, his eyes were blank, pupils gone, replaced by pale voids. Slowly, unnaturally, Scott sat up. His lips curled into a soundless grin. Emily screamed, though nothing came out. Jordan dragged her toward the corner and slammed his boot against the wall. Splinters flew in silence, until the walls suddenly rippled and dissolved, revealing the forest outside. They stumbled into the clearing, and instantly the world returned. Owls hooting, crickets chirping, wind rushing through the trees. Emily sobbed in relief, gasping, "We're out." But Jordan wasn't smiling. Behind them, Scott stood in the cabin doorway. His mouth gaped unnaturally wide, and though they were back in the forest, the sounds around them faded once again. The silence followed. 3 days later, search parties found Jordan's and Emily's backpacks abandoned on Whisper Trail, their phones inside and dead. None of the 3 hikers were ever seen again. But when rangers approached the cabin, the forest went silent. Inside, the ledger rested on the table with 3 new names written in careful script. Jordan, Emily, Scott. That was the story of the silent cabin. Some say the cabin doesn't kill you, it absorbs you. It takes your sound, your voice, your very presence, until all that remains is silence. Would you dare step into a place where the quiet itself is alive? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, in Appalachia, it isn't always the screams that haunt you. Sometimes, it's the silence that never ends. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, subscribe to Wrong Turn Horror, hit the bell icon, and join me again for more Appalachian nightmares. Good night, and beware the silence in the woods.